"Get out, you poor high school dropout. You're totally out of place here." In an exclusive, members-only luxury inn, this utterly misplaced shout echoed through the halls. The voice belonged to a beautiful but ill-tempered woman, a former classmate who had been disliked since middle school. She had shown up uninvited and immediately started hurling insults at me as soon as she spotted me. Even when one of the organizers tried to intervene, she complained, saying it was a complete failure on their part to forget to invite her, souring the mood of the gathering. Apparently, she found out about this place through the social media posts of our classmates, despite not having received an invitation herself. She was obsessively checking the social media of just another former classmate, with whom she wasn't particularly close. Several classmates who posted the information looked remorseful. They never imagined that a classmate they didn't even follow and weren't close with would go out of their way to check their posts. Moreover, none of the classmates who posted had specified which reunion it was for. Was it for the elementary school reunion? Or the middle school reunion? Or perhaps the high school reunion? Yet, she tracked down the classmates who posted and determined that all of them were from our middle school days. She boasted about it, but the other classmates present were quite taken aback. Her level of obsession was honestly frightening. The reason Emily wasn't invited to the reunion is simply because she's disliked. However, she seems to still believe that she's popular, just like in middle school, and complained to the organizer that the reunion couldn't start without her, the star of the class. When the organizer apologized for not inviting her, she snorted in triumph. Then, noticing I was still there, she started to harass me again. Her loud and bothersome yelling was extremely annoying. The commotion was a nuisance to the inn and was obviously making the other classmates uncomfortable. I asked if I should really leave. She said that it was indeed a nuisance that I was there, so I decided to leave. The classmates tried to stop me, but I told them not to worry about me and opened the door to leave. As I left, I heard her say loudly, as if for me to hear, that she was relieved. Little did she know what a terrible experience awaited her the next morning. I'm Jack, 34 years old. In a few months, I'll turn 35. I live with my grandmother and parents, a family of 4. The place I was just ousted from was a private section of a high-end, traditional inn, accessible only by referral. This inn was rented out for our reunion, which was essentially a gathering of middle school classmates. We've always called any such gatherings, whether they were class or age group reunions, simply reunions. And the person who treated me like a pauper and drove me out of the reunion venue was my middle school classmate, Emily. Ever since middle school, Emily had always flaunted her status as a president's daughter, lording it over everyone, and was disliked by her classmates. The company her father owned wasn't large enough to warrant such behavior, which all of us classmates knew. Sure, she was technically a president's daughter, but that didn't justify looking down on others. Emily always acted superior to everyone, but she especially looked down on me, calling me poor. Probably because I wasn't the type to show my emotions much, which Emily didn't find amusing. Even when Emily hurled insults at me, I just ignored them and didn't respond or break down crying like some other classmates. I was frustrated, but I didn't show it. I felt it was pointless to talk back. I think I have an idea why Emily assumed I was poor. It was probably because I was living with my mother at the time, so she might have thought we were a single-parent family. In Emily's mind, a single-parent family equaled poverty, and that's why she believed I was poor. It seemed pointless to argue with someone like Emily, who held such prejudiced beliefs. While I was living just with my mother at that time, we weren't a single-parent family. It might seem like a single-parent situation since my father wasn't living with us, but we were financially supported by him. My father, a Japanese American, is an international lawyer with legal qualifications in both Japan and California. He worked at a large law firm with offices around the world, specifically in their California office. However, when I was in the 4th grade of elementary school, he was transferred to Japan. At that time, my mother and I considered moving to Japan with him, but there was a reason we didn't. My mother's parents. In other words, my grandparents hadn't accepted my father even after 10 years of marriage. To convince them, my mother and I decided to stay in California. My grandparents, while not accepting my father, were always affectionate towards me. It seems my mother didn't want to take away the loving grandparents I had. So, my mother and I stayed in California, but my father would visit us for a long vacation once or twice a year. The opposition from my grandparents was apparently because my mother married immediately after graduating from university. Although my father was 6 years older than her and had more life experience, my mother had just started her career. To my grandparents, it might have seemed like my father had charmed their daughter. But, as I heard from my father, it was more my mother who had passionately pursued him. Also, my grandparents couldn't quite accept that he is not purely American, even though he was fluent in English and of American descent. They could understand it in their minds but hadn't reconciled it emotionally. Thus, my mother and I regularly visited my grandparents and helped with the family business while trying to persuade them. While helping with their business, I began to think that I wanted to do the same kind of work as my grandparents someday. I expressed this desire during the summer of my 3rd year in middle school. "Can I take over here someday?" My words surprised my grandparents and my mother. I admired my father and had said in my younger years that I wanted to be a lawyer like him, so their surprise was understandable. It's normal for childhood dreams to change, but my mother and grandparents probably thought I still aspired to be a lawyer. This revelation changed everything. Apparently, my grandparents had been worried about not having an heir since my mother married my father, and I was planning to become a lawyer. My mother had not definitively said she wouldn't take over, and if she had, my father would have quit his job as a lawyer to work with her. It was clear to me, even as his son, how much my father adored my mother. His expressions of love were so abundant that even I felt embarrassed watching them. Of course, he also showered me with plenty of love. Maybe my reluctance to express my emotions was due to my father's overly straightforward expressions of affection. When I expressed interest in taking over my grandparents' business, my father started talking about quitting his job and moving back to America in the future. I thought it was a waste since he had achieved his dream of becoming a lawyer. But he didn't want to live apart from me and my mother. As my mother and I worried about this, my grandfather said, "Jack can take over when he's an adult," and suggested that I live with my father in Japan. My grandmother also supported this, saying it was strange for the family to live apart for so long. Effectively, they had accepted my father. So, it was decided that I would move to Japan as soon as I graduated from middle school. After that, it was a whirlwind of activity. From obtaining a visa to preparing for the move and selecting schools, and so on. There was so much to do. Eventually, I went to high school and college in Japan and returned to America at 22 to start preparing to take over my grandparents' business. When it was decided that I would return to America, my father said he would quit his job and come back with me, but my mother wanted to stay in Japan and persuaded him to stay. My mother probably didn't seriously want to stay in Japan, but she might have insisted on it to prevent my father from quitting his dream job. Thus, I began living with my grandparents to prepare for taking over the family business. Usually gentle, my grandparents were strict when it came to work. If I slacked off even a little, they would scold me mercilessly. Some time passed under their strict guidance as a successor, when suddenly my grandfather fell sick. He was already 74 years old. Despite still working, His body must have reached its limits. My grandmother, being 71 years old, decided to retire as well. Employees who had been with my grandparents longer than I and had helped out since their childhood recognized me as the successor and agreed that I should take over. There were still some uncertainties, but I decided to move forward with guidance from my grandparents. While preserving the aspects my grandparents cherished, I also planned to incorporate the ideas of the younger employees. 5 years have passed since I took over, and it was time to start new initiatives. Thanks to these, I was leading a very busy life. Occasionally, my parents would visit from Japan and help out. Now, my grandparents and my father have a good relationship. My grandparents now exchange hugs with him as a matter of course. A year into the planning for these new initiatives, just as we were about to start implementing them, I received a call from Michael, a close friend and middle school classmate. Knowing I was busy, Michael's call must have been about something significant. When I arrived at the meeting place, I was surprised to find not only Michael, but also our former classmate, Sarah. I had assumed Michael would be alone, but after hearing their story, I understood why they came together. "We've decided to get married," they announced. Michael and Sarah were my classmates in middle school. However, they hadn't been dating since then. As far as I remembered, they went to different high schools and universities. It turned out that Michael, having overworked himself and fallen ill, was hospitalized, where Sarah, inspired by her beloved grandmother's illness to become a nurse, was working. Everyone knew Sarah had aspired to be a nurse since middle school, following her grandmother's passing. I remembered Sarah had gone to a high school with a nursing program. Many boys, attracted to her calm and kind nature, had admired her. Michael had become a lawyer. Michael and I had been childhood friends. Our houses were close to each other, so I also knew about his father, who is a lawyer. When I was dreaming of becoming a lawyer like my father, Michael too expressed the same aspiration. Though I chose a different path, Michael had realized his dream of becoming a lawyer. His strong sense of justice made him a natural fit for the role, often being the peacemaker in our class. Their marriage news was significant. Sarah, the class's Madonna, and Michael, known for his strong sense of justice. I was curious about the reaction of our classmates. They planned to announce their marriage in the class group chat, but Michael wanted to tell me face to face. I was touched by Michael's sentiment, feeling a mix of happiness and embarrassment. Despite receiving overt expressions of love from my family, it felt different coming from a close friend. Wanting to reciprocate Michael's feelings, I suggested, "Why don't we organize a reunion?" The marriage of Michael and Sarah, who were central figures in our class, was quite a significant event. Part of me wanted to see how our classmates would react, but I also felt that announcing their marriage in a group chat seemed somewhat lackluster. However, Michael and Sarah looked conflicted at my suggestion. I remembered that the invitation for the 15-year reunion, held every 5 years, hadn't reached me 5 years ago. As I asked what happened, Michael and Sarah exchanged glances before explaining. My moving to Japan after middle school graduation was only known to close classmates. Of course, Emily wouldn't know. Apparently, Emily made wild assumptions when she found out someone else was living in my old house and there was no sign of me attending a nearby high school. She had been spreading false rumors among our classmates, claiming that I had run away in the night due to poverty or that I was working at a construction site because I couldn't afford high school. Of course, my friends who knew I had moved to Japan corrected Emily's fabrications, and now, nobody believes her lies. However, due to these lies, Emily became even more disliked and ended up being excluded from a group chat created without her. Currently, the group chat with Emily in it is hardly functioning. Despite the fact that Emily was a classmate, the truth is that for both the 5th and 10th year reunions, She was sent invitations but never responded. However, she showed up unannounced on the day of both reunions, saying nonsensically, "It's dull without me, right?" and didn't even pay the participation fee. This led to discussions about discontinuing the reunions if it meant having to invite Emily. I couldn't attend the 5th-year reunion because I was in Japan, and I missed the 10th-year one as I was too busy learning the ropes at work. Since then, only close friends have been gathering, almost like small reunions. Michael and Sarah were worried about hosting a reunion, concerned that Emily's attendance would spoil the atmosphere. While I could easily ignore Emily's provocations, the thought of her ruining the reunion's mood was something even I wanted to avoid. So, I suggested this. I suggested that we should ask everyone in the class group chat created without Emily. I had anticipated that the consensus would be not to invite her, given the existence of an Emily free chat group, but I never expected the opinion in favor of inviting her to be zero. I was surprised that not even one person, not even Michael or Sarah, thought it might be better to invite her despite disliking her. There was even a significant number of voices saying they wouldn't attend if Emily was there. Apparently, Emily had been looking down on and verbally abusing her classmates in high school and college too. The chat was soon filled with complaints from classmates who had been her victims. To change the topic, Michael posted a comment, volunteering himself and Sarah as organizers. Thanks to that, the conversation shifted from bad-mouthing Emily to planning the reunion. Typical of justice-driven Michael. After all, watching a chat filled with insults isn't exactly pleasant. On the day of the reunion, one by one, former classmates began to gather at the venue. This time, the reunion was held in a rented private section of an exclusive, members-only luxury inn, where entry is not possible without an invitation. Seeing everyone impressed with the venue filled me with joy. As the start time approached, Michael and Sarah took the microphone for the opening address. But then, with a flushed face, Michael announced, "We're getting married." The room went silent for a moment. But soon, congratulations started flying from all around, and the venue was enveloped in a festive atmosphere. Michael and Sarah were quickly surrounded by a crowd, bombarded with questions. Watching them shyly answer, I was moved to tears. Though I'm not good at showing emotions, tears of happiness seem to flow naturally. Maybe with age, I've become more like my father, who is generous with his emotions. I imagined my father would be openly weeping and expressing his joy at such a moment, which brought a smile to my face. Thinking back to our middle school days brought a wave of nostalgia. Despite Emily, our class was famously close-knit. Some of us were even asked by seniors in our club activities how we managed to become so close. Additionally, there were those who were told by friends from other classes that our closeness was almost weirdly strong. Our homeroom teacher had once expressed concern that our close relationships might distract us from studying for exams. Even after 20 years, it seems our bond hasn't changed. The venue, initially buzzing with Michael and Sarah's surprise marriage announcement, settled down as everyone began to share their recent updates. Suddenly, there was a commotion near the corridor connecting the main building to the annex. I could see an employee trying to stop someone. Not just me, standing near the entrance, but most of the attendees started to notice as the voices grew louder. Then, from the entrance where all eyes were now focused, Emily made her appearance. As all eyes turned towards the entrance, Emily appeared, bursting through the sliding doors and yelling, "How dare you not invite me?" Her misplaced shouts echoed through the exclusive, members-only luxury inn. Despite being over 30, Emily still being selfish, which made me sigh in disbelief. Noticing me near the entrance, she turned and shouted, "The high school dropout and poor person should just leave. You're out of place here." Emily had always been beautiful, but now her unpleasant personality was evident on her face. I know I shouldn't judge people by their appearances, but having been bothered by her since the old days, Please forgive me for thinking this way. Uninvited, yet here she was, hurling abuse. I told her, this isn't a reunion, it's an open house. This gathering was officially an open house. That's why the sign at the inn's entrance also said open house. After deciding not to invite her in the group chat, I proposed this idea to Michael and Sarah, who were concerned about not inviting one person due to their strong sense of justice and kindness. A grand open house for the newly built annex, with old friends happening to be the invitees. This provided a pretext that it was just a coincidence that the invitees were old friends. Hearing my suggestion, Michael and Sarah, who probably didn't want to deal with her anyway, quickly agreed. Startled at first, Emily then began to rant, realizing that the gathered attendees were all classmates, making it obvious that this was a reunion. As the commotion grew, Sarah stepped forward and Emily accused her. "You're disqualified as an organizer for forgetting to invite me." Emily began berating Sarah, proudly explaining how she discovered this reunion. It seems she had scoured the social media of former classmates with whom she had no interaction to get this information. Classmates who had posted about the reunion looked apologetic, probably never imagining Emily would go to such lengths to check their accounts. The classmates who had posted about the reunion had all refrained from specifying which one it was. Was it the elementary school reunion? Or the middle school one? Maybe the high school reunion? Nevertheless, Emily meticulously searched through her former classmates' posts, determining that they were all from her middle school days. Her obsession to go to such lengths was truly frightening. I wasn't the only one who felt this way. Murmurs of fear were audible among the attendees. She then claimed her job as an influencer made her adept at gathering information. However, her SNS followers, barely reaching 100, were a known fact in the earlier group chat. She was, in essence, a self-proclaimed influencer. Unaware of her unpopularity, she insisted, "The party doesn't start without popular me," and confronted Sarah. As Sarah apologized, Emily smirked triumphantly. Noticing me, she began to hassle me again. Her loud ranting was nothing short of a nuisance. With the potential disturbance to the inn and the discomfort of the classmates, I had had enough. "If you're going to say that, should I just leave?" I asked her. She insisted it was more of a nuisance having me around. "All right then, I'll leave the rest to you." As I announced my intention to leave the venue, my classmates tried to stop me. Observing this, Emily burst out laughing and said, "Isn't it ridiculous to hold back a dropout to a guy like him?" I assured my classmates, asking them to enjoy themselves, and stepped outside. Emily's voice, claiming relief at my departure, followed me out. Knowing the trouble she would face the next day, I couldn't help but find it ironic. The next morning, Emily's loud voice echoed in the inn's lobby. After each attendee had settled their bills, Emily, who was the last to pay, saw the bill and exclaimed in shock, "What's with this amount?" Confronted with a bill of $25,000, she was in shock. Being just a self-claimed influencer, it was a sum she couldn't afford. Accusing the inn of extortion and fraud, Sarah approached her. "You promised to take responsibility yesterday, didn't you? I learned about what happened after I left from Michael last night, after the reunion ended." Even after I had gone, Emily continued making belittling comments about our classmates. Once she found out Michael was a lawyer, she suddenly started acting overly familiar with him. Emily claims to be an unemployed influencer. Michael subtly indicated his preference for people who are self-reliant, but Emily seemed to think he was talking about her and got carried away by herself. Thinking she wouldn't understand unless he spelled it out, Michael was about to speak up when Sarah declared that he was her fiancé. However, Emily insulted Sarah, calling her plain and unattractive, and then, despite having been all over Michael just moments before, she suddenly claimed she had no interest in him. Even I, who heard about it later, was speechless. Whether it was pride or something else, I couldn't understand how someone could be so brazen after aggressively flirting with someone and then dismiss them. I'm sure the classmates who remained at the scene were just as shocked, their mouths agape. After a while, due to Emily's behavior, the reunion had to be wrapped up. Emily was still insisting it was too early to end, but no one agreed with her. Seeing Emily persistently trying to convince the guys to keep drinking, Michael finally resigned and informed the staff that it was over. Sarah, somewhat reluctantly, told Emily, who was about to leave the venue, "You'll have to take responsibility for driving Jack away." She said it with a smile. Michael, telling me this, looked a bit scared, as if foreseeing a future where he'd be completely under Sarah's thumb. I couldn't help but laugh a bit. Confused by Sarah's remark, Emily started causing a scene, demanding the manager at the front desk take responsibility. When I showed up, knowing this would happen, Emily looked visibly disgusted and said, "Still here, you poor thing. Just disappear." So when I said, "Didn't you call me here?" she was dumbfounded. In reality, I inherited this traditional inn from my grandparents and am currently running it. The annex used for the reunion was built as part of a new initiative planned since last year. In this era, just being a traditional inn isn't enough to attract customers. Hence, we plan to make the annex, which is available even to walk-ins. We're considering renting it out for weddings and corporate retreats in the future. I had planned for the reunion participants to fill out surveys as monitors, so I could consider future plans based on their feedback. I wanted to provide an appropriate venue for Michael's marriage announcement, being a close friend. However, I knew Michael would have hesitated if he knew the real reason. That's why I invited everyone under the guise of a viewing party. Emily, who refused to believe a poor dropout could run a luxury inn, was adamant even after I explained everything. So Michael chimed in, "It might be odd for me to speak about someone else's family, but I think Jack's family is probably richer than Emily's." He explained that this was my mother's family's inn, and my father was an international lawyer. Emily stopped calling me poor, but she made excuses, saying she didn't agree to any payment. However, I had clearly explained to her last night that it was a viewing party. She was the one who assumed it was a reunion just because her classmates were there. Still, Emily insisted the amount was exorbitant. I had no choice but to meticulously explain the breakdown of the amount. The viewing party participants, as monitors, had a fee of $200. There was a condition that participants had to fill out a survey. Part of the purpose was for me, the proprietor, to observe the participants' genuine reactions. But since I was driven out by Emily, I couldn't see their reactions. So I decided to charge Emily the difference for 25 participants. Since the annex's room rates weren't decided yet, I used the main building's rate of $1,200 per person, minus the $200 fee, totaling $1,000 per person for 25 people. Emily, who claimed she couldn't pay such an amount, was getting what she deserved. Michael told her she was lucky not to be charged for the damages she caused to the viewing party. There was a condition that participants had to fill out a survey. However, Emily proposed an amount of just $100 per month for the installment plan. That's an unreasonable amount. It was a ridiculous proposal, taking years to pay off $25,000. At that moment, someone I had called arrived. Seeing this person, Emily's face turned pale and she froze. I had called Emily's father first thing in the morning, anticipating her inability to pay. Emily's father runs a towel rental company. He had frequently visited this inn for business, so I knew his contact information. We handle our laundry and sanitation in-house and had no intention of using a rental service, so I had declined his offers. Thinking he was being offered a contract, Emily's father came eagerly but was made to apologize with his daughter after I explained the situation. He asked for forgiveness with only the apology, citing his business's poor financial condition. Like father, like daughter, I thought, almost admiringly, in a way. Forgiving them now would just lead to more of Emily's rampages. Even in such a situation, she had the nerve to say, "I'll marry you," showing no signs of remorse. When I mentioned calling our legal advisor, Emily burst into tears. Upon seeing this, Michael advised Emily's father, who was sitting there in shock, to quickly take the crying Emily out of the front area to avoid any disturbance to the inn's operation. Then, Emily's father hastily grabbed her arm and led her outside. Emily's father's towel rental company wasn't well regarded in the hotel industry. It was notorious for delivering towels with mold or unremoved stains. Because of such sloppy service, I heard that the company was losing contracts rapidly. I also heard that Emily's father tried to make absurd requests like asking for contracts in exchange for marrying off his beautiful daughter. Emily, silent, was indeed beautiful. There were rumors about someone who, charmed by her photos, agreed to a blind date, only to be completely turned off by her personality. Emily, learning that her father's company was facing bankruptcy, must have forced her way into the reunion, seeking a new source to leech off. Unfortunately for her, none of her classmates, who knew her personality, were interested in dating her. Afterwards, Michael handled the task of informing Emily and her father's company about the financial responsibilities for this incident. Michael has been serving as a legal advisor for the inn for the past 2 years. 2 years ago, my parents returned to America. At that time, Michael, who had always admired my father, decided to leave his office job and study under my father's guidance. My father, intending to retire upon returning to America, was persuaded by Michael's passion and decided to open his own law firm. While my father is the representative, Michael handles most of the operations. It's decided that Michael will take over the firm, with my father supporting him until he's ready to lead on his own. Nowadays, my father spends most of his time at the inn, so it won't be long before Michael becomes the head. As for Emily's payment, which she couldn't afford, my parents ended up covering it. However, the commotion she caused at the inn's front desk became known, leading to the bankruptcy of her father's company. Fed up with her husband's doting on their willful daughter, Emily's mother left the family. Emily and her father moved to a small apartment where they are living by working multiple jobs. As for me, I continue to work hard at the inn. My grandfather passed away last year, but I live happily with my parents and grandmother. The opening of the new annex, which I've been planning since last year, is finally set. The first guests will be Michael and Sarah. Michael and Sarah decided to use the annex wedding plan at our inn. We agreed to offer it at a discounted rate in exchange for using their wedding for future advertising. Even without the advertising deal, I would have been happy to provide it at a discount, but knowing Michael and Sarah, they would insist on paying the regular rate. Since Michael knows the regular rates as our legal advisor, I couldn't deceive him. So, we agreed on them modeling for us. Watching their happy moments makes me want to get married too, but I don't have anyone in mind. What about Emily? No way. That's one thing that's absolutely out of the question.